Good morning, Friendship United Methodist Church. I'd like to welcome you on this 16th day of January 2022. I'm going to talk about the wedding at Cana today. That's my main scriptural passage, but I want to share some things with you on marriage. I think marriage is one of the most beautiful gifts God ever gave humanity. And I don't say that simply because I'm married. I say that as a pastor who has had the privilege of joining together countless couples and watching their relationships blossom and grow into a thing of beauty. Now, there are rough moments in any marriage. I want you to know that. If you're married, you're going to have rough moments. Every day is not breakfast in bed or honeymoon. Take, for example, the story I heard about the woman at an airport check-in counter. She asked the agent for window seats for both her and her husband. The clerk looked at her and pointed out that would prevent them from sitting together. And the woman replied, Sweetie, I just spent 10 days of quality time in a compact rental car with this man. I know what I'm requesting. Even if there is strife, sometimes, and it happens, but in a marriage is still a wonderful institution. I want you to know that. You get to live with your best friend. You get to raise your children. And then when they fall in love, you get rid of them. You have that empty nest. You can do what you wanted to do for a long, long time. Maybe you heard about the one young woman who asked her fiance, "What did my father say to you when you asked his permission to marry me?" And the young man replied, not a lot, really. He just threw his arms around me and started sobbing and said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Marriage is wonderful, but sometimes weddings get to be a little tricky. I want you to know that. A wedding is often one of the most stressful things anyone can do. And there are so many things that can go wrong or right, but I'll never forget a wedding I did in Quincy, Illinois. The bride had been married before, had two younger children, a boy and a girl, and the young girl was the flower girl. When she entered during the wedding, everyone was all smiles. She made a beautiful, stately entrance, slowly down the aisle, throwing the petals on each side. Think of beauty just to watch her gently tossing those petals. Beautiful. Now, during the service, the girl stood by her mom and the boy stood by the best man as we had rehearsed the evening earlier. The wedding was going very well. And then, and completely unrehearsed, after placing the ring on Trish's hand when repeating his vows, he turned to the best man and got another ring. And he reached for the young girl's hand and placed the ring on her finger, saying, "I take you as my daughter, to love you and to cherish you forever and ever." And then he turned to one of the groomsmen who had produced a tiny, not real tiny, but a farm tractor, and a toy farm tractor, gave it to the boy and said, "I take you as my son, and together we're going to farm together." I don't believe there was a dry eye in the house, including mine. And after I pronounced them husband and wife, the two kids took off like a rocket down the center aisle, hitting the doors like John Wayne going through the saloon doors in an old Western, It's hard to keep your composure doing something like that. Today, though, we look at the first of 55 miracles, which John calls signs, events that point to the divinity of Jesus, wonders that reveal the glory of the Son of God. This first miracle took place at a wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. I've often pondered why Jesus' first miracle was at a wedding. Why not raising the dead, or like Lazarus or Tabitha, or giving sight to the blind man, or healing lepers? And I've pondered that. I've pondered it. And myself, I believe it goes back to the book of Genesis, to the creation story, when a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. But I want us to explore this passage I read earlier with the words trusted, revealed, and transformed, because I think they open up the meaning of this passage to us. It unpacks the passage. First, let's look at the word trusted. And as I read this passage, I realized that one of the things it tells us is that Mary, the mother of Jesus, knew she could count on Jesus. She could count on him doing the right thing at the right time. She trusted him, and she trusted God's timing. And that was why she pointed out the minor disaster of running out of wine at the wedding feast. It would sort of be like running out of iced tea at a Georgia barbecue, or having the wedding reception at your favorite Mexican restaurant and they don't have salsa and chips. It wasn't a huge deal physically, but it was a major social blunder. Mary knew she could count on Jesus. And friends, we can too, Alice. Let me tell you about the little boy that knew that too. The little boy, like so many today, didn't have a father who was active in his life. He belonged to the Cub Scouts, and the annual Pinewood Derby was coming up, and that was a father and son activity, and they'd build these little wooden race cars, and he wanted to enter. So his mother decided she would help him. And together they built what was probably the ugliest race car ever built. But it was a race car. It was a working race car. And the boy entered. On the day of the race, all the cars built with the help of the others' fathers, and some of them built them, and the boys didn't even help. We know that. And they looked a whole lot better. They were sleek and slick and painted bright colors, and his looked like a pile of junk. More of a mistake than anything was built on purpose. But it ran. And my goodness, did it run. My goodness. In heat after heat after heat, it won right up to the very end. There were 2 cars left in the race. His and one of the most beautiful cars any of the boys had ever seen. Fantastic looking machine. As the race was about to start, the little boy asked the judges if they could wait for just a minute. And they said, sure. And the little boy folded his hands and bowed his head in prayer. And when he was finished, the race started, and lo and behold, he won. Wow! A reporter came over and asked the little boy, he says, wow, it must feel great to know that God answered your prayer to win. And the little boy said, Oh, I didn't ask God to let me win. I asked God not to let me cry if I lost. Didn't make any difference if he won or not. He just didn't want to embarrass himself by crying. What a humble request that was. No wonder he won. In the Middle Ages, Thomas A. Kempis wrote, when you have Christ, you are rich. He is enough. He will provide you with everything you need so you won't have to count on others without him. People change and fail, friends. You can't depend on them. They are here for you today. They may be against you tomorrow. They are as variable as the wind. But Christ is eternally faithful, Steve. Mary trusted. Mary trusted. She knew she could count on Jesus. And so can we, Ellen. And second, let's look at the word revealed. Because in a simple, compassionate act, the glory and true identity of Jesus was revealed. And that happens every day. Every time someone asks, what would Jesus do, and then does it? Every time someone goes out of the way to be compassionate and loving simply because they have experienced the unconditional love and grace of God, the very presence of Jesus is once again revealed to the world. Once again, water is turned to wine, and the glory and the identity of Jesus is revealed. Listen to this witness from a young girl named Jenny. I was walking home from school one afternoon, and there was a lady I'd never met before, and she was not far from our house. She was old, white hair, looked pretty feeble, and stooped with age. And I went to her and asked what was the trouble, because she was mumbling to herself. She didn't hear Jenny at first. And so Jenny asked again. She says, "Can I help you?" And the woman responded, "Oh, little girl, if you could, that would be so wonderful." And Jenny was a little offended at being called little girl, but she decided to help the woman anyway. And the woman was searching for her daughter's house and had somehow gotten lost, and she knew the address, but she had taken a wrong turn. And Jenny said, "I was going to tell her where she had gone wrong, and I started to, but I couldn't get her to understand what I was telling her." And Jenny debated what to do. Should she help this woman, or should she go home and do her chores? She didn't want mom or dad mad at her. And the girl decided to help the older woman find her daughter's home. And as they were walking through the neighborhood, Jenny began talking with the elderly woman, and I told her about the stores and the shortcuts to get there, and told her where all the phones were, and I asked her where she lived, and pretty soon she was telling me everything. They soon discovered that they had a lot in common. Their lives connected. And by the time they got to the daughter's house, they'd become pretty good friends. The older woman was tired and out of breath from the long walk when they finally found their destination. And she thanked the girl for helping her. She said, "Thank you so many times," Jenny said. "I thought she'd never stop, And she grabbed my arm and she said, "God sent me to her." And she'd pray to him later that night before she went to sleep and thank him for me. At first, Jenny wasn't sure that this woman was serious, but I looked at her and I saw tears in her eyes and running down that beachy, weathered face, And I knew she was. I knew she was thankful. During a normal walk home, the young girl became the Christ, or at least a servant of Christ, for an older woman who had lost her way. And in the midst of it all, a new insight into God was revealed to the young girl. She said, "Maybe God puts you here and he gives you these hints of what's ahead, and you should pay attention to him because that's him speaking to you." One of the simple truths of this passage is that God is revealed in the simple things in life. God is revealed in the simple things in life. And finally, let's look at the word transformed. When Jesus is revealed in the ordinary things of life, and we trust Jesus like Mary did, then we will be transformed. And friends, that is good. That is exciting news. That is great news. Because Jesus, friends, is in the transformation business. Isn't that right, Ann? Yeah. How about that, Robert? Yes. Goodness. The water of our lives will be transformed to the wine of the kingdom. And that wine can transform the lives of others, John. I don't remember if I've told you the story about Lewis Laws when he became the warden at Sing Sing prison. In 1921, there was no prison tougher than Sing Sing. But when Warden Laws retired over 20 years later, that prison had become a model of humanitarian institution and a model for the other prisons. Those who studied the prison gave him credit for the change. But when he was asked about the transformation, this is what he said: "I owe it all to my wonderful wife, Catherine, who is buried outside the prison walls." Catherine Laws was a young mother with 3 small children when her husband became warden at Sing Sing. From the beginning, others said that she should never step foot inside of the prison walls or in any other facility that the prisoners would be using. But that didn't stop her. When the first prison basketball game was held, she insisted on going. She walked into the auditorium with her three beautiful children, sat in the stands with other hardcore criminals and other guests. And some of those guests came up afterwards and asked, "How dare you sit with these men? Why do you take your children in here? What do you think are going? How dare you do this?" And she replied, "My husband and I are going to take care of these men. And I believe that they will take care of me. And I don't have to worry." She even insisted on getting acquainted with the records of the men. She discovered that one of the men, a convicted murderer, was blind, so she paid him a visit. She stepped into the cold cell and sat down next to him, and holding his hand in hers, she warmly asked, "Do you read Braille?" "What's Braille?" he asked. You don't know? "It's a way that you can read with your fingers," she explained. "Well, I've never heard of it," he said. "I'll teach you then," she said. And she taught the blind killer how to read Braille. Years later, he would weep out of love for her. Later, Catherine found that there was a deaf mute in prison, so she went to school to learn sign language. Soon she was communicating with him through the use of her hands. Many said that Catherine Laws was the body of Jesus Christ that came alive again in Sing Sing prison from 1921 to 1937. Then one evening, the car in which she was riding went off out of control, and she was killed. The next morning, her husband didn't come to work, so the acting warden came in his place, and in an instant, the whole prison knew something was wrong. When they heard the news that their beloved lady had died, every one of them wept, some on their knees. The following day, her body was resting in a casket in her home, 3/4 of a mile from the prison. As the acting warden took his early morning walk, he was shocked to see a large crowd of the toughest, hardest-looking criminals gathering like a herd of animals at the main gate. It looked as if they were ready to launch a riot. He walked over to the group, and instead of seeing hostility in their eyes, he saw tears of grief and sadness. He knew how much they loved and admired Catherine, and he turned and faced the men. "All right, man, you can go. Just be sure you check in tonight." And he opened the gate without another word, and more than 100 hardened criminals walked without a guard 3/4 of a mile to stand in line to pay their respect to Catherine Laws. And every one of them, every one, checked in that night, every one of them. It's amazing what one life can do when it's filled with the Spirit of Christ. It's amazing how far a little water transformed into wine can continue that transformation process in the lives of others. When Jesus is revealed in the ordinary things in life, and we trust Jesus like Mary did, then we will be transformed as well, Ardith. In conclusion, that's what happened to the disciples, Anne. Like the groom's first peek under the bride's veil, the disciples got their first glimpse of the promised Messiah through a miracle at a wedding. Water was changed to wine. And through that miracle, the disciples trusted. They saw the glory and the true identity of Christ revealed, and like the water, they were transformed. You and I are called to be the same sort of vessels as Peter, James, and John, and all the others who have followed Jesus. For we have within us the wine of the new covenant. The water of our baptism has been transformed into wine that will change the world. It's the King's wine. If Jesus can transform water into wine, he can transform us into new creations. Look at Bob Schoolcraft. What a transformation from my earlier years. Trust Jesus. Let his true glory and identity be revealed, and you too will be transformed. Thank God, and go forth and fulfill the Great Commission and make disciples of all nations, baptizing in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them all that I have commanded you. And the transformation process will begin. Praise God. Amen.